Okay, perfect. Thanks for the intro, Cassie. I think this is a pretty small group, so we can have a discussion. We can have a conversation afterward if people feel like it. And if you all feel like continuing on with your day and not having a discussion, that's an option too. It's totally fine. We can go any direction with this. My name, obviously, yes, I'm Ruth McCabe, and I'm the conservation manager at Heartland Co-op, or I'm the managing director of the conservation team anyway. And you'll learn about what my team does here in a little bit. And Cassie approached me to ask if I could talk about, like broadly speaking, if I could chat about what conservation agriculture is and how what my team does, how it's being incorporated into larger agricultural operations in Iowa. And then she wanted me to speak more broadly about my experience traveling around the world and doing research around the world on this very same subject. So I'll try to talk about all those things. And I will very broadly address this subject. So I don't know, depending on how connected you guys are to agriculture, some of this is going to seem really basic because I didn't know how introductory to make this for this audience. So anyway, some of what I talk about will be very obvious to you guys, and some might be brand new and you will have never heard of it before. So take what's obvious with a grain of salt, and take anything that you find more interesting home with you and chew on it. But we'll launch into it. So I wanted to talk about agriculture and water quality. Can they get along? And, spoiler alert, the answer is yes, they can. And it can come in the form of conservation agriculture. So we're going to talk about that. Let's see if I can convince my thing to let me click. All right. So first and foremost, the goal today is just, to get you all to see the same vision that I have, which is that water quality and production agriculture can absolutely work together, through the adoption of conservation farming techniques. Production agriculture doesn't have to be juxtaposed to water quality. The two can actually get along really well. In a world where everything is partisan nowadays, I think that it's really important that we understand that there is middle ground, pun intended. I like to make bad puns, by the way. You're welcome to laugh at all of them or none of them, whichever you choose. But I do think that there's middle ground between the environmental benefits that can come from conservation agriculture is incorporated into a highly productive field. I don't think the two have to be separated, right? So I will say that I put numbers at the bottom of all my slides. So if there's a particular slide that you have a question about, write it down and we can come back to it if you want me to go back to that slide. All right, so let's go into it. All right, so I like to give a roadmap to my audiences when I present. So first we'll talk about just some brief introductions so you know who I am and why I'm qualified to talk about these subjects. We'll talk briefly about Iowa. We'll talk about conservation farming and what it is. We'll talk about partnerships and how they help elevate conservation agriculture. And we'll talk about, from my perspective, what is next. All right. So first things first, introductions. So let's see. Don't hold it against me. I'm not actually from an agricultural background, and I'm not from Iowa. I'm actually from Long Beach, California. I was raised in Los Angeles, and then I was raised in high school in Minneapolis. So I'm from the city. I'm not from an ag background. And my original education actually was in linguistics. I was a cryptologic linguist in the United States Marine Corps. I did one tour of duty with the Marines, and I was honorably discharged in the early 2000s. And I decided to go to college in Minnesota. And I went to the University of Minnesota, and I had to take a nighttime lab class, and the only one that fit my schedule was this class called Agronomy 101. And in that, now admittedly, this was 20 years ago, which feels crazy to say that. But anyway, I remember thinking this is going to be the most boring semester ever. But I signed up for the class. I loved it. And 2 weeks into the semester, I went to my advisor and said, hey, I'm going to switch to agronomy. And I remember my advisor saying, do you even know what agronomy is? And I said, nope, but I'm going to figure it out. Now, this is 20 years ago, so I'm a little more up to speed now, but that was how I discovered agronomy. So second career. Anyway, I worked as a researcher at the University of Minnesota for a few years, and then I was offered a graduate fellowship at Iowa State University. So I came down to Iowa State, and I got my Master of Science in Crop Physiology and Production. Along the way, in 2022, I was selected as a Nuffield International Farming Scholar. And so my international research has me traveling I'm still participating in this research. I published one paper in 2024. I'm probably going to publish another manuscript in 26 or 27, probably 27 at this point. But it has me traveling to other countries and looking at how farmers around the world are adopting conservation agriculture and what that looks like in other countries. So that's my background. I've just devoted my career to understanding agriculture and conservation and how the two can work together, right? So if anybody is qualified to speak about this particular very niche subject, it would be me. So who's Heartland, my company? We are an agricultural cooperative, an ag-retailer. Anything that a farmer needs, we can provide it. We have 80 some odd locations across central Iowa, down into Texas and New Mexico, and over into Nebraska. And as I said, if a farmer needs it, we can do it for them. So we market and originate grain. We can provide feed and fuel and agronomic services. You name it, a farmer needs it, we can do it. So if you're familiar with any grocery co-ops, like Wheatsfield and Ames, for example, then you understand how our business works too. So we are collectively owned and managed by our farmer customers and the employees who all receive a certain percentage of patronage and profit sharing back from the company on a yearly basis. So we are a co-op and we're an agricultural retailer at the same time. And we offer all those other things, and we also offer conservation services. And that's where my team comes in, right? So here's my team, part of my team. My team is actually bigger than this now. We have 5 acting workers, and then we just hired another agronomist, and then I'll be hiring an engineer this summer. So we just keep getting bigger. There's just a lot of demand for what my team does. We're really proud of that. And anything that you see on this list is something that my team can help a farmer do. So if a farmer wants to try using nitrogen stabilizers, or if they want to go to in-season or variable rate nutrient application on their farm fields, or if they want to put in a saturated buffer, or if they want to try cover crops, or they want to put in CRP or prairie strips or filter strips, grass waterways, we can help them with all of this. And the goal of all of these practices, to be very clear, and we'll learn more about these, don't worry. The goal of our team and the goal of those practices ultimately is to reduce the loss of soil and nutrients from our farm fields. So this is my team's 20-second elevator pitch. Yeah, they should all have this memorized. I make them memorize it. But if you ask anybody on my team, so what does a conservation agronomist do? They should say, well, we help farmers adopt practices that reduce the loss of soil and nutrients from their farm fields. And that's it in a nutshell, right? But we also focus on education, just like what I'm doing with you guys right now, this Lunch and Learn, right? My goal, always our primary goal, to be very clear, and this is how my team is paid, is to get physical conservation practices in the ground. We prioritize that always, but we also try hard to educate, right? So we hold summer field days and winter supper meetings, and we attend conferences, and we give presentations like this Lunch and Learn. We have a common message, right? Which is that conservation and production agriculture can work together. And it's our job, it's my team's job to help farmers and landowners figure it out. And it's my job to go and find the partnerships that help my team continue to get, funding and be able to do our work. So there were my introductions really fast. I know it was Blitzkrieg, but now let's talk a little bit about Iowa. I want to set the stage about why Iowa needs conservation agriculture so much. All right, so let's dive into it. So if you're not familiar with Iowa, we are number 1 in several agricultural commodities. So we are number 1 for hog production. We are number 1 for corn production. We're number 1 for egg production. And screw Illinois, I don't care about them. We're number 1 for soybeans too. Maybe we're number 2. But anyway, we make a lot of agricultural commodities, okay? And so a common question that I get from folks is, well, do we eat all of that? Do humans eat all of that? And as it relates to the corn and soybeans that we grow, do we eat those specifically? Do humans eat those? Where is what we're producing? Where is it going in the United States or in the world, right? Well, the meat that we're producing, humans certainly eat that. But the grain that we're producing, this is from Farm Bureau. Now, this is a national reflection of where our commodity crops like corn and beans are going, right? And you'll notice by looking at this, a lot of our corn especially is going to ethanol. A decent chunk of our beans is going to biodiesel. A lot of it goes to animal feed, right? So we feed the pigs that we produce and the chickens that we produce, right? Or beef for that matter. So a lot of it is going to animal feed, and then a lot of it is being exported. And the stuff that's being exported is also being fed to animals in other countries around the world. There's actually only a very small part of the corn and beans that we grow anyway that are feeding humans. Obviously, the meat that we grow is feeding humans, but the corn and beans that we grow are pretty much used to feed animals or are used for biofuels. And that's not a value statement. I just, as an agronomist who works in this space and has been educated at 2 land-grant universities in the Midwest, I think it's really important that people have a better understanding of the fact that we grow commodities. And so commodities are not always being used directly by humans. And whether or not you agree with that or not, that's just the reality of the economic and agricultural system that we have nowadays. So some context for you. Now let's talk a little bit about Iowa. So there are 36 million acres of land in Iowa, 27 million-ish, 28, 26, depends on the year. But 27 million acres are in row crop production. So that means, corn and beans mostly. The average age of a farmer is 57.6 years. That might actually be older by now. 60%, this is the number that I think is really important for you guys to understand. 60% of our farmland is rented. That means that the person who's farming that farmland does not own it, they rent it. 80% of our rented farmland is in a cash rent year-to-year lease. Think about that. As a farmer, you're paying top dollar cash rent, and you don't know if in the year or 2 years from now you're going to farm that farm. All right. And 20% of absentee landowners or landowners who rent out their farmland don't even live in Iowa. I want you to just tuck those statistics away. So, how does agriculture in Iowa impact the environment? Knowing what you know and talking about what I just spoke about. When you look at this picture, what do you see? Because when I look at this picture, what I see is the loss of topsoil, valuable topsoil being eroded from that field. And I see the loss of nutrients. Remember? And that's what my team really focuses on. But that's the thing, loss of whatever has been applied to that field, right? So whether it's surface water or water that drains through the tile systems under the soil, it can contain a lot of the nutrients or inputs that were put into that field. And when you have a production system and you're producing commodities, they typically are monocultural systems. So that's how we produce at large scale. And when you have those systems, they are leaky. They do leak nutrients, they do leak soil. And so, these are some pictures that I took. Erosion. That's what I see when I look at that picture. I don't like erosion, y'all. I'm a soil scientist. I am a crop physiologist, right? I got degrees in both of those things. And I don't like soil loss. I don't like seeing erosion. So when I see stuff like this, it drives me bonkers. That's our state's economic value right there, washing off those fields. And when you have erosion, you can have water quality problems. And I know all you have to do is just Google Iowa and water quality, and you can learn all about this. But, you don't just have surface water that leaves a farm field. You also have tile water that leaves a farm field, which contains dissolved nitrogen. So between nitrogen and phosphorus and manure application, because we grow all those animals and their poop has to go somewhere, so it gets put on our fields, right? Even though the vast majority, believe it or not, nobody likes to hear this either, the vast majority of what's being applied is staying where it's put. But even the tiniest amount that gets lost when magnified by 27 million acres is going to have an environmental impact. And so we have water quality problems as well. I say all of this with love for my industry. I chose to become a crop physiologist and a soil scientist. I chose a career in agriculture in the Midwest, though I am from the West Coast, because I love it that much. But I also feel like it's okay for me to say, okay, but we have a leaky system, so how do we fix it? And that brings me to my roadmap. So let's talk about conservation farming, because spoiler alert, that's how we fix it. So what is conservation agriculture? Okay, there's a million ways to define this, and I'm not going to split hairs because you can look at this a million different ways, all right? But in general, conservation agriculture is farming in a way that prioritizes protecting the soil, improving water quality, increasing soil health or soil tilth, however you want to call it, enhancing wildlife habitat, In general, it's a method of farming where the farmer attempts to balance production with protecting the soil and improving soil health altogether. It's just a type of farming system that creates longer lasting, more sustainable systems through building long-term resilience. And resilience is key there, building long-term resilience in their farmland soil. And returning some level, if you're a biology nerd, this will resonate, returning some level of ecosystem services back to the environment. And ecosystem services are things like better water quality, right? Wildlife habitat. Those are ecosystem services. So when I talk about conservation agriculture, sometimes you'll hear me say CFP, and CFP is Conservation Farming Practice. That's what that acronym stands for. All right. So how does conservation agriculture achieve those lofty claims I made on the previous slide? Through those conservation practices, and then many more like them, because there's more than just what you see in this list here. And you've already seen this list once, right? This is the list of things I showed you that my team does. All of these practices you see here improve. They either improve soil health, they improve freshwater quality by removing nutrients or keeping nutrients in place, they increase soil organic matter, or maybe they provide some kind of improved habitat to microbes or insects, birds, or other mammals. Some of these practices are certainly more impactful than others, but really, like I said earlier, in a world where in general we're not doing enough of any of these, we need just doing one of any of these on every one of our acres would make a huge difference, right? So my goal is to just meet every farmer where they are at and then help them advance to the next practice on this list, however that looks like for them. So I group conservation practices into two major buckets, and we're going to talk about both of these. And like I said, some of this might be very elementary for some of you, but just bear with me because we'll get to the cooler stuff later in the presentation. But I lump conservation practices into two buckets, all right? So there's practices that are used in the field. I call these in-field CFPs, and these are things like no-till, cover crops, or precision nutrient application, all right? These are, technically, they are temporary or annual practices that are usually controlled by the tenant farmer or the person who manages the field level decisions. They have to be done every year in order to remain effective over time, all right? Then there are edge of field practices. These are usually structural or permanent or perennial practices. They're controlled by the landowner, not necessarily the tenant farmer. You know, a tenant farmer can't choose to put in a wetland. It's the landowner that chooses to put in a wetland or a saturated buffer, okay? Sometimes the landowner is also the farmer, but more often than not, as I already told you, the landowner is the landlord, and they are separate oftentimes from many of the decisions that are being made in the field. And so I lumped these separately for a reason, and we're going to dive into them. Well, we're going to dive into them right now. So in-field CFPs, I've already said, these are the farming practices that are typically managed by the farmer or the tenant farmer or the owner operator, but the person who's making the decisions in the field, they are usually the one who can choose to do these practices, all right? So these are the people who are running the machines, applying the fertilizer, planting the seeds, raising the crops, harvesting the crops, right? The decisions that they make in the field, that's their domain. And these are the people in general, 60%, remember what I said, 60% of our farm acres are farmed by a tenant farmer. So when I'm working with tenant farmer, this is usually the purview. This is their purview. And this is what I'm usually chatting about with them is cover crops or switching to, reduced tillage or retrofitting a planter for, being no-till or retrofitting a planter to have, retrofitting a planter to have like nutrient application, like starter systems, for example. These are all things that I'm working on with a tenant farmer. And so we'll talk a little bit about a few of them just to, give you some context. So like a cover crop, okay? So a cover crop is a plant that's grown in between the cash crop growing seasons. Cash crop is corn, soybeans. We grow them in the summer. We harvest them in October, right? And then there's nothing in the ground until April the next year, maybe, okay? And so a cover crop is what you plant after you've harvested your corn or your soybeans in October or November. You're going to plant rye, say, something that'll grow over winter, okay? And the idea behind planting these cover crops is to capture and hold excess nutrients in the soil They protect the soil surface over the winter from like wind, so we don't lose them to wind erosion. And they can support soil microbial health by having a living root in the soil over winter. Those plants support living populations, believe it or not, even though it gets freezing, of microbes in the soil. So if you want to see what cover crops look like, just take a trip east on Highway 30 towards Iowa City, and you will see a lot of green fields right now. There's a lot of people around where I live. That's my neck of the woods that grow cover crops. So you can take a look at those and see what they look like. Water quality impact of those, average nitrogen load reduction is about 31%, and then average P load reduction is also about 30%. So cover crops are fantastic at just holding nutrients in the field. Then there's no-till or strip-till or reduced tillage. The idea here is that farmers harvest their crops in the fall and then they have a bunch of stuff that's left on the surface. Now, back in the day, farmers would then go through with a disc or a plow or something and till it all in and turn the soil over, right? But by doing that, they expose their soil to the wind, they break up valuable pore space, they destroy microbial populations in the soil. So reducing how much they turn over the soil is really important. They reduce that erosion by keeping the soil covered with all of this leftover chaff that's on the soil surface. And then in general, over time, it just improves the soil health because it lets those microbes in the soil continue to live. So no-till and strip-till, potato. No-till is you're not disturbing the soil at all. Sorry. And strip-till is you're making a small strip where you're going to plant seeds the following spring. The water quality impact of this, there's not much of an impact on nitrogen, but it holds a ton of phosphorus in the field because no-till is like the predominant way to armor your field and reduce erosion. And phosphorus typically travels with soil particles. Then there's something like precision or in-season nutrient usage. So precision or in-season, so the idea here is you're gridding out your soils on your field, like you see in this stylized picture here. The red areas are areas you might put more nutrients down on, and the green areas are areas you don't need to put as much nutrients down on. The idea here is that a farmer knows where to put nutrients in a specialized way so that they're not wasting excess nutrients in places that don't need them, all right? This does require analysis of grid or zone soil sampling. So it requires going out in the winter on a UTV and taking thousands of soil samples from several different fields. But the idea is you can then set up this map that you can use for the next few years to specialty, to apply nutrients in a specialty pattern. What's nice about this is that, again, you're not over applying nutrients anymore. You're applying what you need where you need it. And the water quality impact is broad because it just depends on how much was done beforehand by a farmer. If they were just doing blanket application rates, then the water quality impact will be much, much higher because they're not applying as much. But again, N load reduction of anywhere from 5 to 10%, and then a phosphorus load reduction of 24 to 46%. So you can really, just reducing what you're putting down can help a ton. Now, those are all things, like I said, that I work with tenant farmers predominantly on adopting those practices. But then, like I said, there's edge of field conservation practices. Now, these are the perennial or the permanent conservation practices that I was talking about, a landlord being the one to make the decision to adopt these, okay? So with these kinds of practices, those in-field practices I talked about, cover crops, no-till, those are designed to keep things in the field before they ever make it to the edge of the field. We're trying to stop soil and nutrient loss from ever leaving the field, right? But sometimes stuff makes it out of the field. Where does it go? It goes to the edge of the field. So edge of field practices are like the last resort. This is what we're putting in to capture anything that made it out of the field and made it to the edge of the field. And again, these are usually structural or they're permanent or perennial. And typically it's the landowner who makes the choice to adopt these. So a big one, for example, is drainage water management. So drainage water management is a way to treat the water that moves through a field's tile system. So whether you know it or not, and if you didn't know, I'm about to blow your mind, most of our farm fields have tile that run 3 feet under the soil surface. And this tile, it used to be made out of ceramic, like clay. Okay, now they're made out of plastic. They capture the water that's in our heavy, wet soils, and they shuttle it out of the field into our creeks and streams. Okay. And if you didn't know it, like whatever goes onto those fields is going into those tiles and can be lost if it's not, captured by plants or decomposed by microbes, which is why having such healthy soil is so important for our water quality. And another way to look at it is this. So here's kind of, what a drainage water management system looks like, it artificially raises the water table in a field over winter. So instead of just letting water passively, I'll go back to this other picture, instead of just letting water passively move off this field all year long, a drainage water management system artificially raises the water table. Just over winter and after planting. So after planting, you put the boards down, you hold water back it holds water back in a drought. That can be really helpful. We like that, right? And it allows the soil microbes to do their job, removing nitrates through denitrification. So the water quality impact of a drainage water management system, just holding water in the field and allowing soil microbes to do the work, can be 30% nitrogen load reduction. And related to the drainage water management system are things called streamside buffers and saturated buffers. Now, if you guys work or are affiliated with Polk County in any way, then you're probably very familiar with streamside buffers and saturated buffers, because Polk County was probably, I think, the OG. John Swanson's team was the OG on saturated buffer batch and builds in Iowa. And so these are basically a streamside buffer of grass between a field and a creek. You can see in that picture, there's soybean fields. And then there's like a 30 or 40-foot strip of grass between the field and the creek. And we're forcing some of that drainage water to move through the soil underneath those grassy buffer strips. And by doing that, the soil microbes, again, are removing the nitrates from that water. So the average end load reduction we see from these systems is about 50% of the nitrogen that's in the water that moves through these is removed. There's also some phosphorus load reduction just because of the buffer strip on top of the ground. It captures any soil that might make it to the edge of the field. And then we have these guys. Now, these are the big dogs, right? These are the nutrient treatment wetlands. These are basically engineered systems that mimic natural wetlands. They're very expensive. They require an engineer. They are designed to capture all the water in a field level watershed. So they capture stormwater, they filter and remove excess nutrients, pesticides, other pollutants that might be in that watershed. They're also excellent water habitat. I am a hunter and I do love to hunt around wetlands. It's good for duck hunting, among other things. Wetlands are fantastic at capturing everything, right? The average end load reduction is around that 50% mark, and P load reduction, phosphorus load reduction is around 85%. So these practices, these structural practices, they're more expensive, but they are very effective. So I'll just take a broader lens now. If CFPs are so great, why aren't they everywhere? And I get that question a lot. Like if conservation practices are so fantastic, why aren't they everywhere? Why don't we see them all over on the landscape? And my response to that is typically, well, many of the edge of field practices specifically that I just talked about are structural. They're expensive to design and install, and they can remove farmable land from production, sometimes permanently. And that can be a problem. If you're a tenant farmer, right, that means you're just losing access to land. And if you're a landowner, it means you're losing rent. And believe you me, that stuff comes up a lot in my research that I do. And then also many of the in-field practices that I was talking about, cover crops, no-till, precision nutrient, those require advanced soil and agronomic training for a lot of people. They can cost money upfront to implement, and in general, they result in short-term yield losses for a farmer. And there's a ton of research that supports this, that especially in Iowa with our heavy wet soils, when you adopt no-till or cover crops in the first 3 to 5 years, you can expect a yield loss. And for tenant farmers specifically, and remember that 60% of our farmland is farmed by a tenant, when you have a landowner that wants top dollar cash rent year-to-year lease, taking the gamble on losing yield for 3 to 5 years by adopting an infield conservation practice when you know your landlord probably isn't going to share in that expense with you? Nope. The answer is no, right? So almost all of these conservation practices negatively impact short-term profitability. And so for a lot of people who don't wake up thinking to themselves, I just need to do the right thing, this is a game. This is a no. This is a nope. So this next slide just addresses that same thing, I think, a little more simply. But most of these practices cost money upfront to implement. Some of them are structural. They cost money to design. They can negatively impact short-term profitability. Short-term being the key phrase there. Long-term, sure, there might be long-term profitability, but in the short term, these practices tend to negatively impact profitability. And many of the infield practices also require advanced knowledge. So all of these things equal what? They equal barriers to entry. In the business world, we would call these barriers to entry. So this is where partnerships come in, right? So how does my team, if we are like fighting against this, how is it that my team can still manage to get all these conservation practices in the ground? And this is where partnerships come in. So we'll talk about that now. All right, so these are some of Heartland's conservation partners, not all of them. And I'm just going to talk in the next few slides about a few different partnerships where basically what I've tried to do in building these partnerships is reduce the barriers to entry for farmers and landowners to participate. Okay, that's my goal. Reduce the hassle factor, reduce the upfront financial hit to the point that it becomes the obvious decision for somebody to want to work with our program and adopt a practice. And these are some of our conservation partners that pay us for what we do. So I think it's important for you to know that my team, we are not paid by the farmers or the landowners that we work with. In general, we don't charge for our services from farmers or landowners, not for the conservation, like the consultation and the work we do to help them sign up for cost share. Okay. Our public-private partnerships pay us to implement conservation practices in the ground. So that's how we get paid. And the main goal of our team, as I already said, is to get physical practices in the ground. So we do that through partnerships. All right, so here's our flag. I'll call this our flagship partnership, and I highlight it because it was with Polk County. But it's a partnership with Polk County Public Works, Des Moines Water Works, City of Des Moines, Idals, and of course Heartland. The partners jointly purchased a high clearance cover crop seeder. Heartland does not own this seeder; it is leased to us, and we seed cover crops in their priority watersheds. And then we help farmers access the cost share to be able to utilize this program so we can sign them up for it. The whole goal of this program was to widen the seeding window. So one of the complaints we hear from tenant farmers especially is my seeding window is too narrow. I'm out there harvesting. I don't have time after harvest in November to get cover crops planted before the snow flies. So this machine allows us to plant in August and September. It allows us to plant in season, as you can see from the picture, in the standing crops. So this broadens that seeding window. We have a very talented applicator who can drive this machine, and he's very good at not damaging crops. And so we basically make cover crop seeding more worth it for tenant farmers because we can sign them up for cost share funding for the program, and we can run the machine and get the cover crops seeded for them so that they don't have to worry about it. All right. Here's another example of a partnership. And again, I talk about this one because Polk County has this same program, right? But we also, at Heartland, we have a saturated buffer batch and build program. So my team also runs our own saturated buffer program. It's a partnership between IDALS, Iowa Department of Ag, and like the local SWCDs and then local private partners. It's a WQI program, or a Water Quality Initiative program. And in this batch and build for saturated buffers, we design and construct saturated buffers in batches, regional batches around the state. And my team goes all over. We've already installed in the last 5 years, 547 structures, of which 218 have been done by Heartland. So, and then a lot of those have been done by Polk County, because like I said, Polk County has their own batch and build. So, and I think there's been even more than 547 structures now. I'm not counting all the batch and builds that there are around the state, but Heartland has done 218 of those. And on average, like I said, these can treat anywhere from 40 to 60% of the water flowing through field tile. What I like about saturated buffers is that they're inexpensive to install and they last as long as the tile itself does. This is a fantastic partnership. It creates a giant easy button for the landowners who want to put these in. And then there's this partnership where we work on oxbows and nutrient treatment wetlands. So this is going after landowners again, but it's a big partnership between, again, IDALS, local soil and water conservation districts, and then private funding partners. My team can help landowners get a wetland. We work with an engineer to design and construct the wetlands. It's 100% paid for by the outside partners. Typically includes sometimes a one-time easement on the acres that are enrolled to compensate the landowner for the loss of rent that they would get from those acres by farming them. Just in the last several years, there have been 147 of these larger nutrient treatment wetlands installed. There, I think 90 are in development right now. 25 were bid out in 2025 alone. Heartland was a part of just a couple of those, but we're very proud of that work. Nutrient treatment wetlands take everybody at the table. And the cool thing about these wetlands is they're going to last for 100 or 150 years. So again, giant easy button for landowners. So those are just 3 examples of partnerships. But what's the theme that I keep talking about, right? Easy button, removing barriers. with the high clearance cover crop seeder, that was focused on tenant farmers predominantly, or owner operators or farmers who are wanting to plant cover crops and making it easy for them. And then those last two partnerships were more focused on landowners. But the goal here is to remove barriers to entry. So providing educational or technical assistance, lowering the cost of adoption, or compensating for transitioned land. And remember, like at the end of the day, my team's goal anyway, is to reduce the loss of soil and nutrients. So for us, those partnerships are what enable us to be able to get those things in the ground so that we can achieve this goal. Okay. By creating these partnerships, we build these programs that help us get as many farmers and landowners on board with conservation as possible. Here are some of my team's numbers. I know this is a boring slide. I should have included like a picture of us laughing or something, or a picture of me falling in a stream, because that happens every year. But I don't have that here. But anyway, just since August of 2020, here are some of the numbers from my team at Heartland alone. We've done quite a bit. I used to joke that I would try to I'm not going to do this to you, but I used to try to sing this like that Christmas song where people are like, 12 French hens, 3 turtle doves. And then I would end with a nutrient treatment wetland and a, single nutrient treatment wetland. But anyway, but now we have so many numbers that it's not funny anymore, but it used to be funny. And if you're all cringing, that's okay. You can cringe. But you can see that we've gotten a lot of work in the ground. And I want to be clear that we're really proud of these numbers, but without partners, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Partners bring funding to the table. Partners bring federal expertise to the table, state level expertise to the table. Our partners are who make my team successful, who help provide funding to our team so that my team can go out and do what we want to be able to do. So without our partners, our work would be a ton harder. And I just want to emphasize that. We don't act as if this is all us. So, all right, what's next? I'll just spend a couple slides talking about what I see coming down the pike, and then we will open it up for discussion or questions or what have you. So what is next? What am I looking at personally as a leader of my team as I develop programs and partnerships going forward? Where am I turning my attention? Well, first of all, what's my vision for Iowa agriculture? Now, I love perennial or edge of field conservation very much. I love it as much as the next person. Okay. Wetlands and saturated buffers are awesome and I love them, right? But to be perfectly honest, we have got to get at these infield acres, right? We need to get more infield conservation practices on the ground. And because remember, we have 27 million row crop acres, and of that, 60% is farmed by somebody who rents it. So that's like 16 million acres of row crop land that we need to get at, and we need to get more infield conservation practices in those acres. So another way to look at this is perennial or edge of field practices, like what you see here, wetlands, prairie strips, saturated buffers. They're one half of the puzzle of that picture that I just showed you. They're one half of the puzzle, but the other half of the puzzle, right, are these cover crops and no-till and precision nutrient application. This is a farm family that I work with, amazing guys in Eastern Iowa. They use a ton of infield conservation practices, but they're all tenant farmers. We need more of these guys. We need more tenant farmers, right? So I use this graphic to explain my thought process here. So, we have 27 million row crop acres. Tenant farmers farm 60% of them. The people who were gonna adopt conservation practices, the early adopters, the people who say it's the right thing to do, which is fine. That's fine. That's a value statement, but it's fine to say that. Those people are the early adopters. They're the innovators, and they've adopted. I don't need to speak to those people. Now they're great and I like speaking to them. We get along really well. I have a lot of beer with those folks, okay? But the ones I need to get at are the ones in the middle of this adoption curve. And these are the people who have razor thin margins, who farm 3,000 or 4,000 acres. They farm with their brother, their sister, their aunt, their uncle, their, father, mother, whatever. They have razor thin margins. They rent 3/4 of their acres. Maybe they own a few hundred acres, but then they rent another 2,000 or 3,000 acres. These are the people we need to get on board. And in a world where time is money, these folks don't have it. They don't have time and they don't have money. And so I need to get at these folks, and I need to get at them by either reducing the effort it takes for them to adopt infield practices, or I need to make a conservation program that is too financially lucrative for them to pass up. So in other words, I need to get these infield practices because they're the other half of the puzzle. So my goal right now, and what I am turning my attention towards, is a partnership program that rewards tenant farmers specifically. I'm less interested in landowners at this point. I'm more interested in either owner operators or tenant farmers. And it will basically remove the barriers for them to adopt multiple infield practices at the same time. So it's going to be a combination of incentives as well as potentially rewarding businesses that purchase sustainably grown grain, or maybe, I'll come at it from like direct cost share for equipment retrofitting. I'm still skinning this cat, if you will. That's probably not a good analogy to use. I am still trying to get at this puzzle, but I'm working through it right now. And this is the next partnership that I'm going to have coming down the pike. So I'm focusing my sights on this goal yet. It is by far the most complicated and most frustrating component. Anybody who works in the trenches of conservation agriculture will tell you that this by far is the toughest battle to fight. It's really easy actually to do saturated buffers and wetlands. Okay, we have figured out how to get at landowners. This is really tough. But I personally have never been one to back away from a fight. So this is where I'm going next. So stay tuned. Maybe in another couple of years, I'll be able to give a presentation over a lunch and learn, and we can talk about this new infield conservation practice program that I've launched. Just give me time. But anyway, this is my vision, right? So basically what I'm talking about is joining these two puzzle pieces together, right? And we get this solid picture, which is to treat all of our agricultural landscape, the infield and the edge of field components, so that by doing that, we can wind up, with farm fields that are highly productive and also better for the environment. And it's my job to build the partnerships that are going to get us there. So that is it. Here's my ending slide. And then I have to do this. Thank you, Raygun, for that. And now I'm going to open it up to questions. So I don't know, Cassie, do you want to read?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks so much. I always love hearing about what you guys are doing. All right. So we do have a couple questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and read those. But if anyone else has questions for Ruth, please type it in the chat. We'll start with Lee. He goes, what are your most successful arguments for getting tenant farmers to implement cover crops?
I don't know that I have arguments. I usually just try to work. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily try to convince somebody to do something. If it's not going to work for their business management, then I'm going to try to help them figure out how to pencil it out to make it financially worth it. So I'll try to find cost share programs for them, or I'll try to find some kind of private funding for them. There's a lot of long-term research that proves that in-field practices build profitability over time. So like SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Council, which is a arm of an arm of an arm of the USDA, has done a ton of research on the long-term financial implications of adopting things like cover crops and no-till. And they have shown that after about 10 to 15 years of adoption, you tend to see long-term profitability. That means jack to a tenant farmer, right? That doesn't mean anything to them, especially if they're on a year-to-year cash rent lease. That doesn't mean anything. And so what I'd really like to do is work with tenant farmers and their landowners. If their landowners are willing to give them long-term leases, that's usually a big game changer for tenant farmers, because if they can sign a 10-year lease, for example, with a landowner, then it's different. Then it's like, okay, if I adopt cover crops and I know I'm going to be farming this land for the next 10 years, I'm more willing to make the initial investment in cover crops because I know 10 years from now, I'm probably definitely going to see these soil health benefits from having adopted that practice. It's a lot harder if a landlord especially is unwilling to sign a long-term lease. But those are the kinds of things I try to do for tenant farmers who want to get to use cover crops and just can't financially make it work in the short term.
All right, thanks. Lee said, I'm also interested in your definition of regenerative agriculture. For me, differentiation between conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture is a challenge.
Yeah, I don't actually differentiate. I mean, in my book, I think people split hairs on those two a lot. I don't actually see them as being that much different. I think that it's marketing. I'll be blunt. I used to work as an organic agronomist. I guess I didn't really talk. I ended up not talking about my international research that I did. I thought I had some slides in here for that, but I didn't. But I also used to work as an organic agronomist. And then when I traveled for that job internationally as well. And I'll tell you, depending on what country I was in, the word agronomy means something totally different. Like when I was in South America, I had people like, oh, you're an agronomist? Great. Come help me with my tomatoes. And it was like, oh boy, whoa, slow down. It's totally different meaning in the United States. I don't know anything about tomatoes. And it's the same thing with regenerative and conservation agriculture or sustainable agriculture. Depending on where you are in the world, those terms are completely interchangeable. And I think in the United States, we just use them for marketing purposes to say that they mean something else. I think some people would argue that regenerative agriculture focuses more on building long-term soil health and it focuses less on maximizing productivity, whereas conservation farming focuses on still maximizing productivity, right? Like the goal is not to minimize productivity for the sake of soil health. It's the goal to make the two work together. Whereas regenerative agriculture might really just focus on soil health. And hey, if productivity goes out the window, find something else that you can grow that's profitable if the thing you wanted to grow won't work. Maybe some people do it that, split it that way. But in my book, they're the same, which is probably sacrilege.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Keith asked, are there any opportunities to work with drainage districts?
Oh, fantastic question. And yes, there is. There is this, I'm not doing that work, but there is an engineering company that wants to start doing saturated buffers and bioreactors as their own batch and build. They're called Agrivia. And Kevin, if you want to connect with them, let me know because I could connect you via email with them. But anyway, they just started like 6 months ago, but they work predominantly with drainage districts. And they came to me like 6 months ago and they were like, hey, we know you do batch and build work with saturated buffers. Can you help us figure out how to do that? Because we work with these drainage districts and it would be so easy for us to do saturated buffers at the same time that we're, retrofitting or upgrading drainage tile in an area because we get all these landowners in one fell swoop. And so I'm working with them to get them on their feet and help them build their own batch and build. So if you're interested, Kevin, shoot me an email and I can connect you with them too if you wanted to chat with them about what they're doing. But yes. And also too up in Minnesota, I'll just finish this with, I think that there's some drainage districts up in Minnesota that are also doing something similar to a batch approach. In my vast amounts of non-free time, I wind up circling virtually with a lot of people who are doing comparable sorts of things in other states. So I think in Minnesota, they're doing something also with drainage districts.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
All right. This is your last warning to get your questions in if you have any. All right. Seeing none. Thanks so much again, Ruth, for being our presenter. This is recorded. If you want the link and you can't find it by searching the Rain Campaign YouTube page, feel free to let me know and I can send it to you. Also, if you haven't registered yet, right away next Monday, we have another Lunch and Learn, which is going to be Karen Wilkie with the Nature Conservancy talking about oxbow restorations. So let me know if you can't figure out how to register for that and I can send you the link. So thanks. Oh, yes,
I will just say, I said Kevin, I thought it was Kevin Griggs, but it was Keith Hubbard who asked the question about drainage districts. I'm sorry, Keith. I'll just say that now. My bad. I thought it was Kevin, not Keith. But anyway, Keith, shoot me an email if you want me to connect you with Agrivia, and I will. Sorry, I just noticed that. Yeah, there we go. Keith, yeah. Okay, I see the thumbs up.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.